Ukraine and its European allies had called for Russia to implement a full ceasefire starting today. Instead, they got a new proposal from Russian President Vladimir Putin for direct talks between the two sides in Turkey this Thursday. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy says he'll be there in person and has urged President Putin to do the same. His offer comes after being pushed to agree to talks by U.S. President Donald Trump.
Ukraine's president has laid down a challenge to Vladimir Putin, making this offer following the Russian president's own proposal for direct talks between the two countries in Istanbul this week.
We await a ceasefire. This proposal is on the table. A full and conditional ceasefire, one that lasts long enough to provide a necessary foundation for diplomacy, could bring peace significantly closer. I will be in Turkey this Thursday, May 15th, and I expect Putin to come to Turkey as well, in person. And I hope that this time Putin won't be looking for excuses as to why he cannot make it. We are ready to talk, to end this war. Thursday, Turkey.
Vladimir Putin blames Ukraine for interrupting previous talks in Istanbul that ended abruptly after Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. Putin told reporters in the Kremlin early on Sunday that Russia is now ready to reopen negotiations.
We want serious talks with Ukraine. The goal is to eliminate the root causes of the conflict and to reach an enduring and long-lasting peace.
Putin's words were met with derision by Ukrainians on the streets of Kyiv.
Putin is a coward. He's afraid. Everything he does is to save himself. Why should we trust him now?
Putin is trying to buy time. It is just empty talk of no consequence.
He just needs a tactical pause, but obviously we could use it as well.
But the weekend's diplomatic discussions bring little respite for Ukrainian troops on the front line, where there's been no let-up in the fighting since a lull over Easter and Russia's unilateral Victory Day pause.
There is no truce. Our comrades are dying. We left our families behind, our homes, our sisters, for whom we must fight. And as long as our hearts are beating, we will move forward, with God on our side.
We are constantly deceived by so-called truces and ceasefires, while they are pulling in their ammunition and their people. They are constantly deceiving us.
As besieged Ukrainian civilians clear the debris of renewed Russian shelling in the city of Kherson, they can only hope that the talks proposed in Istanbul will bring a long-awaited breakthrough.
So lots to unpack here. To help us with that, we've got DW's Nick Connolly in Kyiv and Yuri Rescheto in the Latvian capital, Riga. That's DW's base for reporting on Russia now since being expelled from the country. Nick, European leaders have called for a 30-day ceasefire starting today, Monday, but that doesn't seem to be materializing, does it?
No sign of any change here. We've been talking to soldiers on the front line. They say nothing has changed from a week ago, from the 3-day so-called Victory Day truce that Putin had called. And now, after this European ultimatum, it is all the same. Drone attacks overnight over lots of Ukrainian regions. And now is the question, what are the Europeans going to do? They put their credibility on the line here on Saturday in Kyiv, saying if Putin doesn't agree to a 30-day ceasefire without any ifs and buts, then Ukraine will get more weapons, and also there will be more sanctions against Russia. They're meeting today, the European foreign ministers in London, to talk about that, but certainly the Ukrainians are expecting some kind of strong signal, because otherwise that obviously doesn't look very impressive if Putin gets to not have a ceasefire and there are no consequences.
Yuri, Russia's President Vladimir Putin proposed negotiations in Istanbul this Thursday. Volodymyr Zelenskyy says he will be there personally to meet Putin for face-to-face talks. Do you see a summit between the Russian and Ukrainian presidents happening there?
I think it's important for Putin, for the Russian president, to save face. And his logic says, don't run after Western politicians and don't run after Ukrainians. Don't leave the initiative to the others. His nighttime speech at the weekend was such a signal after the 4 EU politicians plus Donald Trump put pressure on him publicly. Putin promptly came up with the idea of direct negotiations in the near future, but importantly, did not agree to the ceasefire as urgently demanded by the West. So, it's important for Putin to say to the Russians, I started the war, I will be able to end it. At the same time, it's important for Putin not to put relations with Donald Trump at risk, which are very important. And Trump is pushing for an immediate end to the war. So I think that the Russians will definitely send a high-ranking delegation to Istanbul, but I would be very surprised if Putin came to Istanbul personally. After all, he has been disparaging Zelenskyy as a Nazi and a drug user for years and has not recognized his legitimacy as a Ukrainian president.
Nick, where is the U.S. in all of this? Do Ukrainian leaders feel they now have Donald Trump's backing?
Well, certainly it seemed that way over the weekend. You had all those pictures of the European leaders here in Kyiv with Volodymyr Zelenskyy calling Trump, sitting around that cell phone, trying to talk and seemingly getting his support for everything that they were doing. And we'd heard from top US officials that ceasefire is the first thing and anything else will only follow after a ceasefire without preconditions. Keith Kellogg, the Ukraine envoy, saying things to that effect. And then we had a post yesterday on Truth Social from Donald Trump saying basically that Zelenskyy should go to Istanbul, irrespective of the ceasefire happening or not. So it seems like, you've got Trump there undermining his own side's negotiating position. Obviously wouldn't be the first time. I think for now they're trying to work out what the real position is, and if now this meeting in London today gets a kind of new consolidated response to the absence of a ceasefire. But certainly this whole kind of last week has been about the UK, France, Germany trying to make sure that Zelenskyy and Trump are speaking with one voice and trying to paper over those cracks that we saw in the Oval Office earlier in the year.
And Yuri, if talks between Ukraine and Russia do take place in some form this week, what can we expect to come out of them? President Putin says he wants to tackle the root causes of the conflict, but Moscow and Kyiv have very different views on that.
Yeah, it's tricky. I think that both sides see themselves in a better position today than 3 years ago when the first Istanbul talks took place. Terry, the Russians now see themselves to be able to occupy more territory militarily. At the same time, however, Russian troops are not as deep in Ukrainian territory today as they were 3 years ago. This, in turn, could give the Ukrainians more confidence than 3 years ago. From this perspective, both positions would be more hardened today. But the pressure to find a compromise is enormous, and the Russian side has also suffered a lot of losses after 3 years of war. I think Putin will definitely try to achieve for Ukraine to give up its desire for NATO membership, because that was Putin's justification for the war from the start. At the same time, the Russians could have nothing against Ukraine's EU membership as an offer. That would be a step forward compared to 2014, at the time of the Maidan Revolution, when Ukraine's closer ties with the EU were a huge taboo for the Russians.
Yuri Rescheto there in Riga and Nick Connolly in Kyiv. Thank you very much to you both.